Good afternoon, everyone. If you're joining us for the first time this afternoon or today, welcome. If you are back for a second session after this morning's 10:30 session, welcome back. We'll get started, and thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Boa tarde a todos, bem-vindos de novo para as pessoas que participaram hoje de manhã às 10h30 da manhã. Se não, se você é a primeira vez que está participando, bem-vindos.
Muy buenas tardes, gracias por estar con nosotros otra vez, si es que estuvieron esta mañana a las 10:30, y si no, bienvenidos para esta sesión de las 4 de la tarde.
So before we get started in the details today, I'd like to introduce our interpreters and explain how the interpretation works.
Antes de nós começarmos, eu gostaria de estar apresentando os nossos intérpretes e explicar como que a interpretação vai funcionar.
Entonces, antes de empezar, se les va a explicar cómo funciona la interpretación y quiénes somos como intérpretes.
We're proud to make this presentation accessible to all of our families. So when we turn on the interpretation functionality, those who've joined on Zoom will be able to click on the globe at the bottom of the Zoom screen and choose either Spanish or Portuguese. Once you've done that, you'll hear the presentation in the language of your preference. Juliane, could you please introduce yourself and explain that to our families in Portuguese?
Oi, boa tarde, meu nome é Juliane, eu sou intérprete para as escolas de Framingham. Quando nós começarmos a fazer a apresentação, quando nós vamos estar ligando o modo intérprete e você vai poder escolher a sua língua de preferência num globo na parte inferior do Zoom. Então, todas as pessoas que estiverem ouvindo essa apresentação pelo Zoom vão poder escolher a língua que ela gostaria de estar ouvindo. Então, a partir do momento que você escolher a sua língua, você só vai estar escutando e participando dessa sessão na língua que você escolheu.
And Mauricio, if you could do the same for our families in Spanish, please.
Sí, cómo no. Entonces, como ya escucharon al superintendente, yo soy Mauricio Perea, y entonces si ustedes desean, cuando nos están viendo por Zoom, al fondo de su pantalla está un globo donde pueden escoger el idioma de su preferencia, ya sea portugués o español. Si quieren escuchar esto en español, lo ponen en español y nosotros vamos a estar transmitiendo las palabras del Dr. Tremblay. ¿Ok? Gracias.
Thank you both. To give our interpreters a quick snapshot of who's here today on Zoom, we're going to launch a quick language indicator. And if you're participating in today's event in Spanish or Portuguese, please indicate in that now. This polling is anonymous.
Para poder ajudar os nossos intérpretes hoje, para eles poderem saber quem está participando aqui hoje, nós vamos estar mostrando essa pergunta de escolha e você pode estar escolhendo uma dessas opções, em qual língua que você vai estar escutando essa apresentação. E não se preocupa, essa apresentação, quando as suas escolhas vão ser anônimas.
Entonces vamos a mostrarles esta encuesta de manera anónima para que nosotros podamos saber quién está en qué idioma, en español, inglés y portugués. Entonces ustedes pueden escoger esa forma y nosotros darle seguimiento a eso. ¿Okay? Muchas gracias.
Great. So we're going to begin with our interpretation. We'll turn on that translation now. As we begin, I want to remind everyone watching that this session is being recorded on Zoom and can be posted on YouTube following the event.
Se va a grabar en Zoom.
It's also being aired on Facebook Live and will be available for viewing after the event has ended. I'll provide some information up front and answer some questions that have been sent to me. We had a number of questions that came in this morning's session. In fact, we had nearly 200 questions that came in between the Zoom function and the Facebook Live. So we'll do my best in the time that we have together. I'll do my best to address questions at the end. I have a few slides that I'll share with you that will frame each of these webinar models each week so that we have a consistent format for the updates, leaving what I hope is the bulk of the time to address questions and answers in the session. So behind the scenes, so you know, the questions are being added and translated in a Google Doc so that I can address them. So we'll turn this into a question and answer document. We'd hope to do that as soon as possible, but it may take us some time given the number of questions. And we'll post that after the session ends so that families can listen to either the earlier morning session or the afternoon session and also see what questions were raised in case the sessions were missed, or go back and watch a video session at a later date. The questions that are posted in the chat, just so you know, for more housekeeping here, are only visible to me, our moderator, and the interpreters. Other attendees will not see them. We'll do our best on the back end to compartmentalize those questions as people may be asking similar questions, and those are the ones that I'll try to use the bulk of our time together today to address. I'm really delighted that we have this real-time interpretation. I think that can make the information much more accessible to our community, and it would prevent the lag that can often happen with real-time interpretation simultaneously, all in the same presentation. So I want to thank Rochelle Santos and our communications department for leading that and making that available to us. It's really, I think it's a real proud moment for Framingham in terms of two-way engagement with all of our families, and just very appreciative of that. At the end, so we'll wrap up, the session is slated from 4 to 5 p.m. And so we'll go that length. We'll stop promptly by 5. If we're done, if there's not a lot of questions, or if the questions have been answered and we're done before that, we'll stop early. But that's the intention. Then I'll just say a few final words and we'll wrap up. And so the intention here is for this to be very informal, to make myself as available as I possibly can be to our entire community, to our parents, to our students, our staff, people in the community who are just interested in finding out what's happening with education, which is, I think, weighing heavily on everybody's mind these days as we're trying to sort out what's happening with the pandemic while also figuring out our schedules for the fall. I think we all come at this work every day with those lenses as parents ourselves about what we want for our own children, and we're framing all of these conversations and these decision makings around safety and security. Safety of our students is the most important variable that we consider here. So I'm going to begin that way. I'm going to share my my screen with you, and just bear with me as I do that. And I'm going to show a slide deck that I shared with the school committee at their last meeting. And so here I want to just show you basically what's happening with our back to school. This is indeed a work in progress. This continues to evolve. In fact, just today I had a call with the commissioner this morning right after the 10:30 webinar with that has some information that's different actually than the 10:30 webinar. So the information continues, like the virus trajectory, continues to change with each passing day. So while I'll try to make both sessions on each Wednesday, this week and next week, fairly comparable with the same information, there may be new information that's available or questions that were raised in one session that I can then address in the second. And so while I'll try to make them as parallel as possible, I do want to provide the most current information to our families and to everyone who's watching as I possibly can. Again, that's the spirit of this. It's not going to be perfect. I'm not working off of a script. I'm working off of what I've internalized from these conversations every day since March, and to just share with you everything I know at the time that I know it and what our thinking is. And I just ask in return that that you're patient with us as we as the information changes. So these are the sort of bottom line up front where I want to begin these 4 points. Again, it's a work in progress. We do have a timeline that we're working within, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. That's the large group to which all public education reports in the state of Massachusetts. And we have very clear marching orders that we have by the end of July, we have to have a plan in place that addresses, a draft plan in place that addresses 3 options of returning to school. One being sort of if you think of it as a pendulum, one being a full return to school, one being a full remote, which is some working from home, obviously, and then some hybrid in the middle is another consideration that we have to present. And then ideally we would present something to the state that gives a preference as to which of those models would work best for Framingham. Now, every school community is going to be looking at these same 3 lenses to see what works in their community. So while as the number 2 point here is in the slide is that FPS is prioritizing the hybrid model, that's because we have did the sort of what we call pressure test to see if we were taking students back to school in person, could we safely do that, meeting the health requirements. What's interesting about the education dialogue, and maybe you've had the same reactions, is around the 3 foot versus 6 foot distancing. And it seems that everything is compliant with the 6 foot. Everywhere you go, that seems to be the norm. But in education conversations, it seems to be more around 3 feet, which to me seems more like the minimum standard. So we know in coming back to school that there's going to be, what we call it sort of aspirationally, to get to this number of 6 foot distance, but there's going to be passing time. There's going to be times in our school day where we can't ensure that students are going to be that 6 foot distance. But to come back and assume that we could start at 3 feet seems to me that we're going to be setting it up for students to be in much closer proximity. So I think 6 foot is where we're aspiring to be. And when you take the size of Framingham and try to plug it into the school buildings that we have, you quickly see that it's impossible for us to bring back all of our students and staff safely in that manner. And so we view the hybrid model to be the preferred model. That's not been finalized. I'll be presenting this along with our senior leadership team, the school committee, at their meeting on the 29th. And ultimately on the 31st of July, right on the 29th, the school committee will hear that. On the 31st, the plan will be due to the department. And then ultimately by August 10th or sometime before that plan is due to be published and translated and accessible to our families so that we know what the plan is for the fall. Number 4 is around transportation. This is one of the more upsetting bottom line points to be made here. I mean, all of this is upsetting. Hardly any of this is perfect. It's the best we can do with what we have been asked to do. Transportation is going to be a challenge for us. We're getting models, and this morning I reported out we've heard like 50% or 30% total bus capacity. Allowing siblings to sit on the same bench, for example, is allowable. So there may be some margin of 1/3 or 1/2 of the bus total ridership that we might be able to accommodate. Currently, as you may know, we do accommodate many more families in Framingham than the law requires. In fact, we accommodate more families than our own policies require. Going forward, that will be a wondering as to whether or not we can continue to offer that. I'm hopeful that we can, but I think as a starting point, the safe measure is to start with what we have to provide relative to our policy, which would mean a significant challenge for many of our families at the middle level, high school level, and who live within the 2-mile mark, who might otherwise be accommodated with transportation. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at this as part of our models that I'll explain to you in a moment. But just to put that in context, so what if we were to run enough buses to accommodate our current practice? Okay, so it's not possible. To do that would require us to triple our bus fleet. We'd have to add another 150 buses to the mix and find enough of those drivers to do that. And the likelihood of that, the expense of that, is really not practical. It's not possible for us to consider that. So we have to think about using the resources that we have. We had some challenges starting the school year. I probably don't have to remind many of you of that. Getting enough drivers, getting buses to school on time. I just can't even wrap my head around the idea of adding 154 more buses into that mix and trying to secure drivers and just manage morning traffic in the city of Framingham with that many buses on the road. So just a few points I want to make bottom line up front. So we've taken this slide deck and we've broken it in really into 6 parts that are 6 elements that we've tried to capture our thinking and our planning, which will respond to what the department is asking for in this plan. And so I'll just touch on these quickly and then move into questions after I go through all the element slides. So first is school meals. This continues to be a front of mind for us because it's one of the more logistical challenges for us. When you have students eating, if you're using our cafeterias, the requirement will be 6 foot distancing. Even if the 3 foot rule were to apply, 6 foot is the rule for taking face coverings off and to eat. So you'd have to accommodate that in cafeterias. And also the lines, the queuing of students waiting for lunches, you'd have to have that distancing. And it becomes very, very much of a logistical challenge to wrap students potentially in throughout the building, around the building. And that creates obviously other kinds of interactions that we're trying to avoid through social distancing. So the school meals becomes it's what we're calling a work in progress. And just to be clear on that, I want to editorialize for a moment. The work in progress is not like we haven't gotten to that topic yet, or we haven't figured that out. And well, there may be some truth to that, It's a topic that we actually press on every single day, and in some cases, we're waiting for more specific guidance that's coming from either from medical professionals or from the department itself as to what the rules of engagement will be on these areas. So a work in progress should suggest to you, the viewer, or someone who's interested in finding out, well, what are you guys thinking? We are thinking about this, and we're just waiting on specific guidance to see how that will work with whatever model that we're going to propose. And I didn't tell you up front, the idea of a hybrid model of some remote and some at home is going to be the preferred proposal here. Let me comment on that also before, in case I forget to do that later. The idea that came up at the last school committee meeting this past week was that the hybrid would be a model that would be supported. The decision is local. There was some question I had at that meeting as to where the sort of the nexus of decision making is. Does it happen with the governor? Does that happen with the commissioner? Does that happen at the local level with the Board of Health, the Department of Public Health, the school committee? Where does that decision making around the model of school exist? And it is local. It is a local decision that would happen with the school committee, and presumably in cooperation, as has been the case all along with our city's Department of Public Health. That would be the decision-making authority. There always exists, though, like you saw with the closing of school early in March, when I had closed schools for a couple of weeks, but shortly after that, the commissioner closed for a longer period. We may recall, we thought we'd be out for a weekend, turned into 2 weeks, turned into 3 weeks. And then the governor directed a longer closure, ultimately to the end of the school year. So through executive order, the governor has the ability to do that. So that could stand. There is always the potential that there could be a decision that comes from the governor on this. I don't know. I think that it's speculative, but I believe that largely in communities, the decision is going to be local, because the ability to come back in some form continues to be one that has to be considered by school community. Let me say a little bit more about that. That might seem like a great idea, except that for superintendents who are trying to be consistent, it makes it very challenging when a school community that can be more nimble because it's smaller, perhaps, or it has a declining enrollment of students, might be able to accommodate all of their students in person. That, by the way, is the intention at the state level at this time. The directive from our commissioner and from the governor is that the idea is that we want to bring students back as quickly and safely as possible in person, knowing that that's going to be the best possible experience for students, particularly students who have not been engaging much since last March. We're looking at this, though, through that safety lens as the priority. And in a district that has nearly 10,000 students, over 2,000 staff, can we safely accommodate that kind of demand? Our view on that right now is no. As we continue to watch the number of cases in the community and surrounding communities, that will be an indicator for sure as to how soon we may be able to come back in person or even begin that hybrid. So what we're seeing is likely going to be I say likely because that's to be finalized by the school committee and the Department of Public Health, but what we're hearing, if you watch the last meeting of the school committee, is likely a full remote start to the school year and then transitioning to a hybrid model of some sort. And we're going to set specific benchmark points in time, decision-making points, so that families have as much notice as possible in planning for the future. Look, I'll be honest. When it comes time to forecasting a snow day in the difficult weather, I thought that was a bad part of this job. I try to give notice the day before, as you probably know, and sometimes I get it right, and sometimes I don't. But I try to give as much notice, understanding that childcare is needed, work arrangements, all that has to be considered. So we try to give as much possible notice. Same rule would apply here. I'll do the best I possibly can to get information out to families, likely through this webinar format, so that we're crystal clear on what I know day to day, and then make those decisions around what's going to happen. But the way I see this playing out is likely, if I had to forecast this one, is a full remote start morphing into a hybrid approach, which you'd have like one group on 1 week, another group on a different week. Ideally, those groups would be of the same families, so that we're transporting families of students together that can ride on buses more closely and can be together. And obviously for planning family schedules, it would be, seems to me it would be more convenient. We have a lot more work to do on the specific AB plan, but that's how we're envisioning this right now. That said, don't make your back to work plans or babysitting or childcare plans today, because this could in fact change in a day. Like I said, some of the facts of today's presentation changed in the last few hours. So I think it's just important that you know this is sort of the current thinking and understand that frame here. As we think about physical layout and furniture in classrooms, I did allude to this a bit, but we are looking at this. The way that's measured, again, going back to the 3-foot rule, they are looking at, they being the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, measuring that 3 foot from the edge of the desk to the edge of the desk, or the edge of the chair to the edge of the chair. So that's that margin. We've test run this in one of our schools. We don't like it. We don't particularly like a 3-foot feel. And that's kind of what led us to doing this pressure test, to say, well, we're much more comfortable with something more safe in our view, is following then again that aspirational 6-foot distancing model. Public health accommodations, we are working, obviously, taking our lead from the science on this. We're taking our lead from the boards of public health and the experts. And so we are working on that. As you see in this particular slide here, working on signage packages, not dissimilar from what you'd see in the grocery store or anywhere you go, with the arrows and signage, reminders about hand washing, the availability of appropriately approved sanitizer at certain stations in each of the classrooms throughout the school buildings, and then providing the PPE, so the personal protective equipment. We are asking students and staff, everyone, to be wearing a face covering. We're grateful for the city's Disability Commission Disability, in providing us with a number of face coverings that are clear, which would allow for students, for teachers, for example, to be worn, so that if students require reading lips as part of an accommodation, that we could fulfill that. I think the more we can actually see our faces and engage in this way will be helpful. So we're grateful for that. We've also secured PPE through a state vendor. This question had come up this morning. Do we have enough, or have we begun that process? And we certainly have. We've begun to secure the PPE through a procurement process that was made early on available to school districts, to make sure that we are good to start and continue our school year with those appropriate safeguards. I want to add another little editorial here. The idea of the face coverings, and we call them masks, but really face coverings, the requirement as it stands is still from grade 2 up. So if you're a child in grade 2 or a staff member, you'd be required to wear a face covering. If you're riding the school bus, it doesn't matter the age, you'd be required to wear a face covering. That's from pre-K on up. The rule is around for kindergarten, pre-K, kindergarten, and grade 1 is a little less clear. The language there is recommended, and I'm going to recommend to the school committee, and with the support, hopefully, of the Board of Health, I can't imagine they wouldn't, that we impose a requirement for face coverings for all students in school. We understand there's going to need to be time for mask breaks throughout the day. It's going to be hot coming back when we do, although if we're coming back in, say, late fall, it will hopefully be lesser of a concern, and hopefully the mosquitoes will also be out of our way. We have that challenge, don't forget, the triple E, if you had forgotten about that added layer. So the idea is that we would give mask breaks for students. The lunchtime would be another way to do that. But the idea of wearing a face covering, I know that there's a lot of mixed feelings on that in the world, maybe even among your own families. Our approach is just one of abundance of caution. Wearing the face covering, in our view, is just one way, and I think Massachusetts has proven it has kept its numbers reasonably low by comparison because of those proactive measures. So that's the position I'm going to take on this one. It's going to be difficult to enforce. I would just ask for families to cooperate with this, understanding that we're doing this with everyone's health in front of mind. So students pre-K right through would be asked to wear a face mask, face covering every day to school until it's deemed safe not to. Again, you can see the slide here. I'm just touching on some of the high points. As we get into like certain kinds of procedures and meetings for visitors and those kinds of things, we'll spell all that out in our comprehensive plan, and we'll let you know. But again, nothing here would be dissimilar from what you might have experienced in other kinds of settings. When you go to the doctor's office, or you go to get a haircut and you have to check in by phone first, those kinds of rules of engagement will apply. As we consider social emotional learning, this is really the whole child. We know there's a lot of Challenges right now with students having been home, not only academic challenges, which I'll get to in a moment, but just that disconnect from peer groups, feelings of isolation. There's a lot of mental health challenges that come with being in a selective quarantine like this that we're going to have to be ready to address. Even our own staff, I mean, they've not been in person together meeting and talking, and they need that time to acclimate themselves. Just the other day, I had an in-person meeting. It was one of the few I have had since March, and it was strange to be in a room in 3 dimensions in a meeting. And but I would have told you back in March how strange it was to be in a virtual environment, as many of you are probably experiencing. So there's a lot to be emphasized here about the adjustment to coming back and the kinds of safety we need in place for students, but also the kinds of professional development for our teachers to understand and work in a remote environment where they're teaching through a live stream. It's very different than that engaging practice of having, a vibrant classroom where you have that real-time push and pull from students and conversations, and it doesn't feel quite that way. So we have professional development to pay attention to, community building, restoring, relationships. We've had our students that have left school, as you know, in March, and there was not a lot of closure in a lot of ways, and that has left a lot of students feeling in some pretty vulnerable ways. And so I want to just call attention that this is front of mind for us. Part of this too is the, and this kind of stems from, I didn't address this in the morning session. I want to call it out though here, the ongoing code of character, conduct, and support work. This is really important. We started this work last year, and it's probably years too late, but we started it last year. We want to make sure that we're having some expectations around restorative practices throughout our district as we look at discipline. We've had some challenges with student behaviors in schools. We hope that we want to be ahead of that when we get back to our schools and make sure we have some processes and procedures in place to manage that. This gets to an element that's been raised recently around what happens if students don't wear their masks, and it becomes this sort of punitive mindset. Well, will they be, kicked out of school or made to stay home? And I've got to appeal to our families here and say, this is one of those examples of it being restorative. Let's have a conversation. If a child is not wearing their face covering for some reason, or they're playing with it, and it's a conversation. It's about understanding, what it means to be safe and keeping yourself safe, but also keeping your safe self from others in terms of virus spreading. And so that will be no doubt worked into our code of character, conduct, and support. Although at the time we hadn't considered that with a COVID-19 lens for sure. School personnel, we're working. I'm grateful that we've worked very, very collaboratively. I would argue with our Framingham Teachers Association and with our Administrative Association. So I'll give a special shout out to Chris Mulroney, President of the FTA, Lori Brockway, Emily Beatty, and also Barbara Connery, who represents the Massachusetts Teachers Association in Framingham, and also our Administrative Association with Jeff Convery, Alfonso Ariano, Colin Confley, and who've represented us as well, Bobby Ortiz Jr., our custodial unit. We've been working really as much as we can together collaboratively to be thinking about all the considerations with reopening from the student lens, but also from our personnel lens. There are vulnerabilities among our staff. There's conversations around, well, students aren't necessarily, at one point, we thought they wouldn't be a carrier of this virus, or it was very low impact or low risk. But if you are an adult staff member who is vulnerable and you're in school, there may be risk. And so we're trying to weigh all that on balance and understand that we have to serve our students, of course. We also need to take good care of our teachers and our support staff and our administrators. So all of this is in the mix as we consider the kinds of reopening guidelines and safety protocols. So I just want to call that out. In this particular slide, it does call out there are certain protections for certain, for maybe staff members with members of their own families who are, if they're ill. It does call out that in this work here, but we have found that since March, sitting at the table together and talking through conversations around effective teaching practices and ways to make our school safe and logistics continue to be ongoing and productive. And I'm pleased to report that, and I hope our association agrees, the various associations agree. That's at least my feeling on the matter. Around professional development, I did mention around the need for technology and how teachers can use technology and leverage those kinds assets to inform instruction. I'll get to that in just a second on the next slide. We're also looking to really have some focused conversations. There are book clubs that have already begun among our staff, focused book clubs, also affinity groups in our district with staff of color in particular to deal with issues around race. That's obviously pretty central in the conversation happening in the world, and it's certainly central in our community. And so we have prioritized, I'll be asking the school committee in their goal setting to also prioritize conversations around race in schools and engaging those really difficult conversations, but making sure that they have the proper training. They, being our entire school district, our staff, have the resources and skills to engage those important conversations with our students, with one another, and really make our schools really an open door for our entire community where everyone feels valued and safe. That is not the case right now, and we have an absolute obligation to address that head on, and so that will be our priority agenda, in addition to the safety kinds of protocols and things we'll have to prepare our staff for. And just one more editorial on that. In a conversation today with the commissioner, I won't spell out the specific details. I haven't seen it in writing yet, but it does seem as though the 180-day school year will be something lesser so for students anyway. We've heard maybe 177. It could be even lesser than that. Number of days. So we'll produce a revised calendar once we have that specific update. The idea for that is to give front-end time for educators to come on board and get the necessary safety training or curriculum training and racism training that we envision to ensure a smoother start when our students do come back in person. Moving on to academics, this has been there's been a lot of consternation around academics as to what's happening. Let's be clear, what happened in March is not what we want to have happen in September. What was happening in the spring of last year, again, when we thought we would be out for a matter of a couple of days, obviously turned longer, was what we sort of coined, the phrase that's been coined is around crisis learning. And that was providing resources, providing deepening of content that had been taught since the start of last school year through March. We all know all too well, rather, that we need to push this forward. Our teachers are up to that task. We have to look at how to do that. In my perfect world, I'd see this as a live streaming kind of model where students, whether they were at home or they were in person, when we do finally open in a hybrid model, where they could talk to their teacher and see their teacher, they could do that in either setting, from their home or in person at school, if that was their week to be in. This requires conversations with teachers. This is certainly a change of what the practice of teaching would be, but the idea that we want to shift away from a resource calendar with links that are provided to families who would then facilitate the learning at home, we envision something that's far more forward-moving than that in this model, and we are working with our teachers cooperatively to envision those kinds of models, and I've been really encouraged by the conversations. I'm sure you will be too. I think I hope you'll agree that as we all became more adept at using various technology, media, and applications and ways to engage with students in learning, we've become better at it. There's always room to grow, of course, so I think people are more generally up to the task of trying to reinvent in some ways. And so we need to work that through with our staff to make sure we're setting everyone up to be successful. Our students, of course, but also our staff. With regard to specials, here I cite out, band and chorus. These have been topics of conversation because of the potential for droplets to be expelled if you're playing a musical instrument or if you're singing. And so this is currently under review based on the call with the commissioner this morning at 11:30. We expect guidance to be out probably in the next day or two around electives. And so we'll be able to say more about that. Also athletics, as you probably saw, the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, MIAA, made a ruling that they would basically delay the start of the season until September 14th. That was as of yesterday. The DE, that's also pending any changes from the department. I say the DESE, that's the department, to see if they have any other rulings. And that is also expected to be coming out very, very soon. No date was stated today on the call, but it is a priority. So we'll be watching, of course, with great interest around what's happening with these sort of co-curricular activities that happen that are really an essential part of our schools. So let me move on from there. Academics continued. There's, the priority for us is we've been watching to the extent that we have good engagement data. It's very subjective. You know, if a student gets up in the morning and logs into their computer and completes a task, that's, I guess, one level of engaging. It's different, though, than if a student were to engage in a 1-hour lecture with feedback with his or her teacher. It's a different level of engagement, but there's really no way for us to capture the nuance of that. So we've been trying to watch very closely all of our students, and I mean all of them, nearly 10,000 of them, and tracking this data. I'm not encouraged by the level of engagement, frankly, that we've seen since last March. So we're going to have to make sure that we double down on that to the extent that we can encourage families to make sure that their children are engaging. But to be sure, there are some conditions that are built into the DESE expectation. So grading will happen. It won't be just a pass-fail. And there'll be some level of attendance being taken as well to ensure that there is engagement. Those two points last year caused, in not just Framingham, but in communities everywhere, a tremendous tapering of engagement when it no longer became a factor in one's grade or in one's attendance in school. So these are being addressed by the state, and we'll be seeing some of that guidance, and our plan will reflect that. But again, our goal here is to address the learning gaps. One of the silver linings here is we had an opportunity through the kinds of meetings we've had with grade levels across the district, which doesn't lend itself so well in an in-person experience to have those meetings. We've been able to really get a good sense of where every child is or should be, provided that we have the engagement data that's been submitted. And so the first order of business is going to be to really connect with families, connect with children, however we roll that out. And the one thought, for example, might be that we have families that come into the school, meet with the teacher, all the safety protocols followed on some sort of a schedule. We can check in and make sure that the child has the technology they need, the wireless infrastructure at home to access, and also make sure they have the textbooks, whatever materials there are they need in the hands of our students. That's different than it was, as you recall, last March. Last March, we were on a weekend scrambling to get Chromebooks out because we had to get ahead of a full quarantine across the Commonwealth. And so that was a very different approach than we'll be taking in planning for remote coming in the fall. The idea is to identify every student where they left off in March and to begin from there and fill those gaps in learning. There are additional challenges that are not going to be as easily met. Students who've been on IEPs, for example, or on IEPs who require services. Those services have not been delivered because they couldn't be delivered depending on how the IEP was written. And so we're obviously prioritizing students who require the in-person experience as part of our forward planning. And whether that looks like students in cohort A and cohort B, there could be a possibility where students are coming in both of those cohorts to school in order to meet IEP service delivery needs. But that remains a conversation at this point with the state and obviously locally to see what's going to be decided by the school committee as to how we proceed. Similarly, other students, not just students with IEPs, to single that group out of students, but students who require language support needs have not been met well, in my view, or in our school view, through the distance that we've had. And so we also have other levels of engagement for a variety of reasons that have been low, and students there obviously are on our radar and our priority. So every student's a priority to come back to school. We want to engage everyone. The question is when we can do that safely, and sooner than later, I hope a vaccine will be available to make that a possibility for all of us. My last point here before opening up to questions is around communication. This is an example of what I hope you'll find to be an effective tool. I would appreciate your feedback. You can throw it in the comments on Facebook Live. You can throw it in the comments on the Zoom chat if you're signed in that way. You can send me an email. We take a lot of critique in this business. All the things that we could do better. We get a lot of ideas every day, and it's appreciated. But if we're doing something that's okay or pretty good, let us know that too, because it would be nice to know that we're on the right track. This is not going to be perfect. It's still not going to be accessible to everybody. And the times of the day probably don't lend themselves perfectly in people's summer schedules, work schedules. So that's why we're recording the sessions and making them available in other languages. But as we go, so there's going to be 2 more. Next Wednesday will be another session like this, two slots. But I'd love to get down to a single session where the information can be sort of at the end of the day, one time, the most up to date. Perhaps when families are out of work or whatever the afternoon may look. If you have feedback on that, we'll be polling that over the next week or so. Let us know what you think and how we can make this better, the production quality, anything that you have for feedback. And also, if you think we're doing a good job and this is on the right track, let us know that too. I'm not aware of a lot of school districts that are actually taking this effort, so I hope that it's helpful to you as I envision it to be in terms of really engaging in a two-way conversation. So let me move on from there to a Q&A. I've talked more than I wanted to, at least for this first session. I'm not going to always talk this much. I wanted to just spend some time at least getting everybody acclimated to the structure of what I envision here. So I know we're coming up on time. So let's get to the questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and get back to the window. And hopefully that was helpful. I know there's a lot in the chat, so I'm gonna rely upon my good team to assist me in getting some questions in the queue. So just give me a minute to read and respond simultaneously. I'll do the best I can. Thanks for your patience with me as we get this off the ground. I think the first session this morning went pretty well, and so hopefully I covered everything today that I covered this morning. Okay. One of the questions is, would clear mask be available for guidance staff so they can emote with students? It's a great suggestion. The clear mask concept is a great idea overall. My wife is a music educator, and so she would love to see this for all of her students, so she could, if and when they're allowed to have chorus, kids could sing and she could see how they're forming vowels. And certainly the same would be true for kids who are learning how to speak and learning how to form words. And so, again, we're grateful that the commission, the Disability Commission, has provided us with a significant quantity of clear masks, and we'll certainly look at that. I know we are ordering PPE, personal protective equipment, and we will certainly have a conversation about that feedback. I think it's really helpful to make that facial connection. So it's a great point. Okay, the question here is, help me understand why the plan is to not return until November when health indicators seem to be pointing to an increase in cases in November and subsequent return to quarantine. It also seems to be a plan to be at home only. So the intention, once again, is, and again, talking this through with Dr. Wong, is a hybrid approach. Like, I hesitate to use 50% as a number because it's going to be some faction, a small enough faction to accommodate 6-foot distance in the school, being safe, but having in person. That's the goal. I don't know whether November is really that date. It's hard to forecast the future on that. I'm saying November because we talked about having the first couple of months. November tends to be a point from Dr. Wong's view, and I won't speak for him, but to characterize his last comments was, we're also dealing with Tremblay. So there's been suggestions of having, we'll have the kids outside, have outdoor classrooms. It's a great idea. Gives you space, you take your masks off, but it does become problematic in certain hours, and whether or not those are just desk hours or if it's during the day. So Tremblay tends to be, by November, a thing of the past. And so that's likely why the idea was. It could be earlier. I mean, again, the goal here is to get students back to school and staff back to school as quickly as possible in person. So that remains the goal. The question becomes, at what benchmark is it safe to do that? And I suspect we'll probably see how schools are returning and what is happening. And so I'm hesitant to promise something. That's why November, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it's a point in time that's not September. So we've taken the school year because some of our schools, as you know, operate on quarters or trimesters systems. So we've taken the year and divided it into sixths. And so 1/6 of the school year would be a good pivot point for us to make a decision. Okay, it's now October 10th as an example. I'm not sure if that's the exact first benchmark date, but it resonates in my mind somehow. If it is October 10th, so by that time, a couple weeks prior, you'd have a lead on what the thinking is for that next phase. It's very similar to what the governor did with the reopening of Massachusetts, or other governors have done in other states, where you knew that at some point you could go to the beach, but it wasn't going to be, like in April. And not that you want to go to the beach in April anyway. But it would be at some point in the future, but it wasn't going to say, you know, we're going to open the beaches eventually. So you want to have something hopeful. So we're saying November for now, but it's an arbitrary marker in some respects. So we'll continue to work on that, and I think these regular updates will be an indicator. You know, we're watching daily what happens in our own city to see how cases are spiking here or there. At one point we were down in single digits, and now we're in double digits. So, you know, and then one day the guidance is that students or young children aren't the problem in terms of carrying, and then other times you find that, well, no, turns out that kids actually, you know, 1/3 of them, or whatever the number was, had tested positive. So the data continues to change, and so do we with that data. And so I can't predict the future. I wish I could. Maybe I don't. Maybe I don't want to even have that talent. But we'll continue to provide as much information as possible. But right now, we're going to plan to start at home. The school committee will rule on that with the Board of Health by the end of the month for sure. So right now, this is, to be clear, a proposal. Cohorts, the next question is, cohorts seem to be touted a lot. How is that possible at the high school, given how different student schedules are? Yeah, there's no question that in elementary, you know, first grade class, if you had everything being even, you had 20 kids, 10 are in, 10 are at home. You could probably make that work at the high school with electives and other kinds of passing time. And how does that all work? So the high school has been hard at work, working on schedule mock-ups. Bear in mind, at one point, we were starting from a full return side of the pendulum that swung then to a full, you know, remote, and now kind of settling on this hybrid idea. So we're trying to work through those schedules right now. So there'll be much more to come, and you'll be hearing in the high school, since this is a high school specific question, Principal Banak will be providing an update, probably something similar to what I'm doing for you, to let you know, and that will be school by school. So every one of your school principals will be communicating with you about what the reopening plans are. They're already developing their plans based on sort of the district model that we're framing it by. So there's much, much more conversation. We're not going to answer all the questions today. It's a great question. The high school is particularly complicated in that regard. So we'll be sharing more with you on that. Again, it may seem like an inconsequential point, but it's a really important point that everything we do, we need to work cooperatively with teachers and administrators to make sure that we can do what we're proposing. And so this work is collaboration, and it takes time when you're bringing people from across the table, so to speak, bargaining and getting to a point where we can reach some agreement that this is, one, a good idea, and two, safe for students, and three, safe for our staff. It's going to meet all those metrics in addition to others. So it's not as simple as throw out a good idea and just do it. There's conversations that are required. I'm being very frank with you. It's important that the nuance here is understood, because it certainly is not simple. Not that I think that anyone thinks that's the case, but it gets further complicated when districts are moving in their own different directions. And so we have to do what's best, what we believe to be best in framing that. Next question. This morning, you mentioned that FPS tends to be full remote at the start of the year, the reevaluation in October. Does this still stand after your meeting this morning? It does, yeah. You know, as I understand it from the data this morning, it sounds like 85%, I don't know, don't quote me on that, but I believe the numbers around 85% of school districts in Massachusetts are looking at at either a return or a hybrid combination. I don't have the ability I don't have the numbers to divide that out, or bifurcate that out, and which would mean the 15% presumably would be remote, I guess. But again, the Framingham model is a hybrid proposal. It's not. It is remote. It's the remote side of the hybrid model until we are able to then come into school in that cohort A/B model. There are other districts that may be proposing a solution that's fully remote, fully from home, full year. I can't speak for those. That's not the Framingham proposal. But as far as what I said this morning, yes, the idea is that we would start full remote and then we would transition as soon as it's safe to do so. Look, if we find that, you know, it's September 15th and we're seeing cases still drop, there's the hope of a vaccination, we're going to come right back to this and say, you know, how soon can we move on this and trust what we're seeing. It's not like we want to just lock in forever, but bear in mind, there's a lot of logistics that have to be worked out to get students back. And so I think the better bet right now is taking a sort of drawing a line in the sand and saying, you know, let's plan for hybrid for the year and go from there. And then let's figure out where we can move the pendulum. There may come a time too, and look, you got to be honest about this. You could have a case where you have exposure, and through contact tracing that has to happen, you may have to shut down a school, like we did in March in Potter Road. It happened, and we had to move immediately. And we didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the systems in place to do that well. And I would argue that it's going to be different this time. But again, we have to be ready for that. What happens if you come back to school? And I predict this will happen in districts. They'll come back for a day or two, and they'll be shut down. And then suddenly you're in a full remote environment. So, we're hoping the best laid plans here. The reality is we'll see how this actually plays out in practice. If the hybrid model is adopted, will siblings be in the same week in, week out schedule? We're trying to prioritize that. We are coming at this from a family lens. Again, looking at, how can we accommodate siblings? How can our students who are most vulnerable, who've missed the most, who've regressed, we need to prioritize students in that regard. And so there may be a cohort that's coming together. In addition to that, we have students who've been identified as a high need that we need to prioritize. Again, we're looking at all those options, but we're taking the family lens as the lens guiding us, because we understand that families have to work. They have to make ends meet, provide. You may not have the same flexibilities for working from home as others may have. And it's important that we weigh all that out. And it's important we come at this from a lens of what the hardship could look like for our family. So please know that even though we're probably not going to we won't make everybody happy, that much I can assure you. We're going to try our best to walk in your shoes, at least when it comes to transportation, working from home, expectations around having to work from home, and also teach your child, and shifting some of those responsibilities so you're not feeling the same kind of burdens that we were carrying unnecessarily last spring. And no promises. I don't know how this ultimately will play out in practice, but in our thinking about this, these are the lenses which we're applying, and I hope that's helpful. I'm shooting straight, telling you 100% honesty what I know today. And again, it could change in a day, but the philosophy has remained the same, that we are being very intentional about supporting our families and students and our staff as we think about every one of these scenarios, and they're all impossible. You let parents know exactly what you need: PPE, masks, wipes, so those who have a chance to help providing, not just their own children, but donating extra. Absolutely, thank you for that. We will be happy to pursue that. Thank you for that offer. It's a great gesture. Again, there is money that's been allocated, federal dollars been allocated to support PPE, and we're certainly buying that to make sure we have enough for our staff and students. And we appreciate that generous offer. District providing PPE for staff, we'll have enough to provide for staff. It's becoming almost like your own personal statement as to what your mask is like, how it ventilates, how you like it. So if staff need it, we'll provide it. If many staff though will be bringing their own each day, and I would expect the students to be doing the same thing. Okay, going through the questions here. I know we have just about 5 minutes left. Again, I hope you're finding this helpful. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, just kind of talking to you. But again, I hope it's making some difference or helping to calm some nerves. How will the hybrid model work? Yeah, more to be spelled out on the specifics of that. That's the work that we're doing right now. Again, we're talking that through with teachers, about live streaming or how that will look, and more to come on the specific technology platforms. We use Google, we use Canvas. We have a few different models that we've been using. Someone had asked in the previous session around meetings. You can use Zoom. It's like I'm using here today instead of Google. You have to bear in mind too that there's also privacy considerations that we consider for students, and the Google Classroom platform we're comfortable with because of the student privacy that's available. So just with every decision, I think I've said this in other comments somewhere, I don't know where I was saying it, but with every decision, there's like 100 sub decisions or tentacles that come out of that decision. And they're all complicated to try to address. So as you have feedback, as you have ideas to what we can do, share that. There may be a great idea that you have. We've not engaged a big community think tank on the return to school. And here's why. We're taking our lead from the governor, from the commissioner, and from the department. So even if we all sit around and come up with some great ideas, it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be what's supported in the DESE directive. So at the time when we were told to start the reopening planning, we were told that 85% of this would be directed and 15% would be local decision making. It seems like those numbers don't actually hold. We've been doing a lot more local decision making, but we hope that this kind of webinar, this two-way engagement opportunity provides a way for you to give input. I've gotten a lot of emails from many of you. I probably owe some of you some responses. I'm sorry about that. I've been pretty varied with those, but I will respond to all of them. And there's been some great suggestions that have come up that we've tracked and logged and we discussed. So this will be a community conversation. It's still only July, but we will continue to talk with you and get a pulse. There was a concern about the previous surveys and, well, how do you want us to respond back to a plan that's not really a plan? I get that. It's a fair critique. Well, when we do come up with a plan that says we're going to come back with this more prescribed hybrid model, we'll be asking for feedback to tell us, do you intend to send your child, yes or no? And we need to have, we understand you have the right to change your mind, but we want to make sure that we are plotting and planning for almost customizing for every single child, from food to transportation to learning. And we have to know exactly, and not that you can commit without knowing the data around the virus, and that's always subject to change. Look, if we find that we're bringing you back to school, your child back to school, and you're not comfortable with that, then you keep them at home and they can continue to learn remotely, and that's perfectly fine until there's a time where it's comfortable for that child, your child, to come back to school. So all this will be worked out. Just please be patient with us. I don't have like this answer guide that's been provided to me that I'm just working from. We're literally working around the clock to design this that considers our families, not the families of Massachusetts, that considers Framingham need and building around that. So again, I just want to underscore and ask for your patience. So we've come to the end. It's just about 5 o'clock, 4:59. So I'm going to turn it back to our interpreters. I want to thank them one more time. They've been working. They've been talking as much as I have, and so I thank them for their time today. Again, we'll follow this up. We're going to need a little bit more time to prepare the questions and answers, because there are many of them that come in, but not surprisingly, there's a lot of copies of questions which we can answer and provide that either in a Q&A document, but also in the plan that will be coming out next week, the school committee. So be on the lookout for that. I'll be back in touch again next week with another webinar update. Again, give us feedback as to how we did today. How did it go? Was it useful? Was it not useful? Was it a good investment of time and information? And bear in mind that the information could be different tomorrow. So that's what I know today. And so thanks for your attention. Thanks for tuning in on a July afternoon. And I hope you have a great evening, everybody. Thanks so much for your attention today. Be well, be safe, and I really look forward to seeing everybody in person, hopefully very soon. Thanks so much.